Built the next 19th century building. This one is a place to house convicts, but interestingly enough, it's not a prison. That's right. You'd have to look hard to find a modern building of this type built after the 1960s which won any architectural awards. Hi, I'm Michael Birchall, Australian historical fiction writer, and I want to share my admiration of this next project with you, one of my 19th century favourites. Now, when Napoleon was defeated he freed up thousands of soldiers after that Peninsular War from the British Army, and these had fought a long campaign. Many sadly did not land on their feet and turned to crime. Remember, Sydney's need was to be a penal settlement. Well, the crime rate in England went up and there need to be more convicts transported. The New South Wales Governor, Macquarie at the time, was a humanitarian, and a need for the new barracks was now front of mind. As mentioned earlier, this particular prison was actually a barracks to hold male convicts, but at night only. So it was like an early 19th century type of halfway house, I guess. It is located in Sydney's Macquarie Street, which is a significant historical precinct in Sydney with many fine architectural masterpieces extant. I owe courtesies to the National Library of Australia and the New South Wales State Library for the use of the watercolours and pictures you'll see here. Convicted for fraud and transported to Australia, the barracks architect was Francis Greenway. Despite his rambunctious character and ego, Greenway was a very talented architect, and what we now are going to talk about is perhaps one of his finest buildings. Governor Macquarie realised in the second decade of the 19th century that containing male convicts at night was necessary to reduce the crime throughout the town. Most convicts would labour as distinct from our modern interpretation, which meant they weren't locked up all day but were free to work on public works and earn some money, provided they did their share for the government as well. The Australian term public servant actually came from the convict era. So, Governor Macquarie needed a secure place that could be locked down at night so the convicts could sleep there and then return to their duties in the morning. The wattle and daub huts they had been living in were health hazards and of low quality. Again, we must keep reminding ourselves that Sydney was 12,000 miles away from its controlling authority in London. Significant today as a distance, however, in the early 19th century it took at least 6 months for any order or any direction to be given from London to reach Sydney. Now, this must have been extremely difficult for the fledgling Sydney government in trying to get instructions from their lordships, especially with the amount of public works required. More than that, London-based Lord Bathurst, who was the Secretary of State for Colonies at the time, was the absolute ruler and gave Macquarie, or for that matter any governor at the time, no latitude or jurisdiction in any matter to build a colony and to get a development underway under these circumstances was more challenging and was to lead to problems for Macquarie during the end of the decade. According to the Historic Houses Trust, the barracks building was to be a powerful symbol of change in the colony. It was seen as both a sign of sweeping changes in the management of convicts and a clear statement of performance and authority by the governor. End of quote. The barracks became a towering achievement for Greenway, but like all buildings that are not budget controlled, the barracks suffered the same fate. Greenway invoked a dubious comparison with the cost for London's Millbank prison, which cost the public upwards of £500,000. Budgets weren't strictly controlled even in the early 19th century, not a lot different from today. According to Greenway himself, this building is executed conformably with the most elegant proportions of the Greek school. Opposite the entrance gate, 4 pilasters break 9 inches before the face of the work, standing on a plinth with a double string course under the eaves of the projecting roof, giving the appearance at some distance of a capital to the pilasters with an elegant entablature and also supporting a pediment where the roof ends. In the tympanum is placed a very handsome clock. This is the oldest continuing operating clock in Australia. Bit of trivia made here, which does much credit to the maker. The building plan was simple. It had a central corridor on each floor, running its full length. At right angles to this, corridors made way to a flight of stairs on each side of the building. Each floor is divided into dormitories, 2 large rooms sleeping 60 and 2 small rooms for 30 men. Total of 400 men. The men slept in hammocks and tied back to the floor framing of the story above. In summary, the barracks is a shining light of Greenway's legacy in Macquarie Street. Its simplicity and proportion represented a fine example, pediment and entablature working closely with the brick pilastered walls, which were impressive and elegant in the 3-storey extant building. For its time, it was world acclaimed and surprised a number of visiting dignitaries for its scale and size in what was then in 1820 still regarded as, you guessed it, a penal colony. At the time of Unbound Justice, the first book in the Australian Sandstone series, John Leary and his family would have seen the last of the female convicts housed in the barracks, with the convict transportation ending in the late 1840s. So, that's the barracks, and let's allow a look at the next building